Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. A big welcome to all of you. My name is Laura, and I'm delighted that you are joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today, I am joined by Eric Svensson, who will talk to you guys about the Power Query Editor and some of its pitfalls that you need to be aware of and how to handle them. So, we love hearing what you guys have to say, so don't forget to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESPC_community and our hashtag is ESPC. Tweet us, at us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, Get Answers from Reports Fasters with SVG, with Stephen Razel. The webinar takes place on Thursday, January 11th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Learn all about Azure AI with our upcoming Content Week full of Azure AI content. Get ready for a week of innovation and learning as we dive into the dynamic world of Azure AI. ESPC is thrilled to invite you all to our upcoming Azure AI Online Content Week, where experts will share the latest advancements, strategies, and breakthroughs in Azure AI. This online learning week takes place next week from the 15th to the 19th of January. Join us for 4 Azure AI webinars on topics such as generative AI, Azure OpenAI, prompt engineering, and more. You can register for these events at sharepointeurope.com/Azure AI Week. Elevate your Power Platform work ethic and supercharge your savings. You can save a whopping €500 on European Power Platform Conference 2024 tickets. Hurry, as this offer is only valid for some time. So after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Eric has kindly offered to answer your questions as they come in, so please do ask your questions if you have anything that you want to ask Eric. You can type any question that you have into the questions window, and questions will then be selected and answered as they come in. And as always, this webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Eric. Hello, Eric.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure to share one of my favorite topics, Power Query. So let's kick it away, and I hope you can see my screen now.
Yeah, that looks good.
Good. And I'm not going to bore you with a lot of slides today, but let's see if I can just take it in here. Don't have to go on my other screen. So yeah, the title is Don't Trust the Power Query Editor. We do get a lot of help from the Power Query Editor, but sometimes it helps us a bit too much. But that's what we're looking at. First, a short who am I? I'm a Microsoft MVP for the last 6 years in data platform. I started the Power BI user group in Denmark, but have now left the torch to my dear colleague Jens Vestergaard. We do monthly, still do monthly webinars as well. And I'm also a co-organizer of the Power BI Cruise, and keep an eye on that. We will have an event in the beginning of June this year. Again, last year we went from Copenhagen to Oslo, but this year we're going from Stockholm to Helsinki and back. My daytime job is I'm the partner at Cadman Solution, where we provide a Power BI as a service solution plus Power BI consulting, mainly for because our clients are within the FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods business. My daytime, I work with Power BI, luckily, and DAX, Azure Analysis Services, and of course also now Fabric, and a bit of Power Apps and Power Automate / Flow. And I typically claim that I've been working actually with Power BI since its beginning. So my first certification was actually in Excel 5.0, where we back then had Microsoft Query in order to get data into Excel back then. So I've used a lot of Microsoft Query and done a lot of VBA, but I wished I had the Power Query back then, because it's a really, really great tool. You can reach me at Twitter or read some of my blog posts. That's not that frequent, but or you can send me an email if you have a topic or a question. But today I am going to talk about the Power Query Editor, because in order to actually control what happens in your Power Query, you do actually have to learn some basic stuff, at least about M, which is the Power Query language. And for sure, turn the formula bar on when you work in the Power Query Editor in order to see the code that is actually generated. And sometimes I also compare the Power Query Editor with, if some of you have recorded macros in Excel, you know that it actually writes the code for you, and that's also what happens when you use the Power Query Editor. But if you limit yourself to using the interface in the Power Query Editor, you do actually miss out of some of the functions that Power Query also have, because not all functions are visible via the interface. So what we will look at today is what I think you at least should know about the mQuery language. Have a look at what actually happens and what could cause you some gotchas when you import Excel or CSV files, and also an example of how the steps that are created in your Power Query steps, where you sometimes, based on the title, actually can think that Power Query does one thing, but it actually does something else. But let's go to the demo part and have a look at some data. So I will switch to the Power Query, and you will get a copy of this file as well, and also my short presentation. So the first element here is, what should you actually know at least? First of all, I typically my advanced editor up here. So on the Transform tab, you can add that to the quick access toolbar, so you quickly can get to the code. Now, when we build our queries, you know that we get steps, as you can see out in the applied steps over here, A, B, C, and typically we will expect that the order matter, but it actually doesn't. So if I change my code to like this, and we need to end now, what will the result be? Will it still be 3, or will it turn an error? It does actually still contain a 3. So the order of which the lines are here is actually irrelevant. Now, what happens if I type in B here? Now the result, the let statements will return B, and when I click done, twice perhaps, we will get 2. So, and I can move this around if I wanted to. Now, read the code, but it actually doesn't matter. That also means that I can refer to any step previously. So if I need to use the value returned from this step, I can use this later on in my query. That is particularly interesting when you have a sort of a variable that you need to reuse in a later stage. So remember this, that you can refer to any line in your code. Another important thing to know is how to create lists, because a lot of the functions in Power Query uses a list as an argument in the function. And you can construct lists simply by using the curly bracket and entering values. And this will give you a list. Notice that it doesn't have the table icon up here. So if I convert this to a list, you can see you can actually recognize whether you're looking at a table or a list, depending on the icon in the upper corner. The elements in your list doesn't necessarily have to be the same data type, because in a list, the data type for Power Query doesn't really matter. It also means that I can actually create a list within a list. So the first 2 elements is the value 1 and the text array. But now in the third element, I actually put in a list of lists. Another thing you can do is actually create a longer list quite easily. So if I wanted the values from 1 to, let's say, 10, I can use the ... to create a range. And I can do like this, and you'll see that it doesn't, in this case, it actually looks at the value, and now I cannot create a list with a step range because it will go from 1 to 10, but we can't do the other way around. Then we have to do some of the building. Another way to build lists is what happens if we use the text A and do like this. Now we actually get a list of characters that might come in handy. If we only want A and F, yes, we do like this and have a list of that. And we have a list with more than 1 column? No, you cannot. Lists are lists. Yeah.
Your sound seems to be kind of dropping in and out. It's a little bit patchy.
Oh, let's switch my sound then. Try to do it.
No, I can't seem to hear you now.
Yes? No?
That's a bit better now, yeah.
Good. We'll try this. Well, and another thing you should know is that in this case, we have a table. So when I can refer to this table. So if I create a new blank query, and let's take blank query, and we will refer to the, now let's do it a bit easier. I can right click here and reference this table. Now I get a reference to the result of this query. But if I only wanted the first name, I can use the brackets and refer to the column name in order to get a list of values in that column. Another thing we do, I still do a lot, is actually to search for documentation of all the functions. And if you use the #shared command, you will actually get a list not only of all your own queries in your model and your own expressions and parameters, but you actually get a list of all the built-in functions as well. So by referencing the shared and turn this into a table, we actually get a table of all these elements. And the interesting thing is that, for instance, we have a function called select, and where the select word is included. And if I wanted to find out more about the table select columns, I can filter the list on this. And when I click on, not on the function, because that will invoke the function, but when I click besides, I will actually see that we actually get the information or documentation from the documentation side as well, because it's identical. But we do get information that this is a function. It uses a table as the first argument, columns as the next argument, and then we actually have an optional field called missing fields. So it's an optional field, and it's as of the missing field type. And this argument is actually not present when you use the choose column selector up here. That is not present. So knowing this will enable you to handle what happens if in your list of columns, either you have referenced a column that is not there. What should then happen? Typically, you would probably go to the internet and look for learn.microsoft.com and find the documentation, but you can actually get the information directly in Power Query. And we can see here that the missing field has a missing field use null or missing field ignore. So if you want the column still to be there, you can use null, and then all the values will be set to null. Or you can say, I want to ignore the error, and then the column won't be included. It will just disregard the reference to the column name. Using this will make your queries more error-proof and make sure that even changes or some changes in your data might not break the automatic refresh in your Power BI service. This is this is the thing that I think all Power Query builders should be aware of and learn how to get quickly access to the documentation, but especially also to create a custom list and list of values as well. Okay, now I have started, because I have some demo files, I have created a parameter here that specifies where the files is located. And then I have pointed a query here using the connector folder files in order to create a table of files that I want to work with. But let's start by looking what could go wrong when you just click from the interface in order to import a CSV file. So let's create a reference to the files. And I have a CSV file here called people or folk it.a. This is actually a CSV file downloaded from the Danish Statistic Bureau, where the population of Denmark is extracted in a CSV file. When I click on binary here, you will see some steps automatically applied because Power Query helps us to create this import of a CSV file. Now the navigation, the first step is, let's move into the advanced editor. And we will just shorten this in order to create the code to be easier to read. So I'll just call this X, and the reference here in the next line should also be updated. So X. Now the source was files. That's the file, and it refers to the content table in order to get a hold of this specific file. When I click the file, you'll see that Power Query constructs this information for me. So it uses the folder path and the name. So what happens if the folder path actually changes? Well, if I put my files in another way, I would have to go in here and update the data. But I could actually modify this and use the parameters that I referred to earlier and say, I want to change this to the file location instead. And because I clicked on the file name folk it.a, it also refers to that. And it will pick that content from that file. Now you can see that in the bracket here, it actually uses two sort of search criteria. First the folder path and then the name of the file. Now I changed the file location to the pointer of the file. But if I knew that this file actually was present in the source and I didn't know, and I could change the source no matter what, and I knew that there was only one file that was in this folder, I could actually remove this as well, saying I want the file name folk 1a CSV to be imported, and I know that the source only have this file, so I can simply limit my reference to this. Now the location is just where the files actually are and not anything specifically referenced in the web that is created when I click through the Power Query editor. The next step is we use the connector csv.document, and that has some arguments. The first part is the source. That will be the content from line A, what I've just called X. And then it has some columns, delimiter, extra values, and encoding information. Now, as you can see now, this is actually wrapped into a record that will be created. The record, just to show that, y equals this one and a comma, and just click done. Now the y, now you can see that the y is actually constructed here, and the delimiter is set as a semicolon. It says it has 5 columns, and the encoding is this, and the quote style is, in this case, none. Now what happens if the file actually has 6 columns next time? Because I've added another, perhaps an attribute or the age in the file. Now, because this is hard-coded when I created the first file, I need to take this into account that the data can actually change. So if I want to control the number of columns that is imported, I could actually simply remove this. And if another column is added to the CSV file, then all of the columns from the CSV file will be imported. If I want to modify this, I could change this and reference the Y, and we get the same result. If I switch back to Y, you can see that I'll just go into the advanced editor again. Now, when I look at the CSV here, you can see there's actually an argument called columns as well. And it turns out that you can actually reference, by using a list, the names of the columns that you want to import. So if I add an argument here and then specify the name of the argument, columns, put in equal, and the column name that I only want to import is called the text column 1. Oops, I forgot a comma. So the columns is a list of values. The list contains the name column 1. And when we go to this one, we actually only import column 1. So by controlling and specifying which column names you actually want to import, that's another way of specifying the columns that you actually want to import from this particular CSV file. Any questions so far? Nope.
Nope, there's no questions in here.
Yeah. Now in another list I've created, I've specified that I want column 1 and column 2 imported. And again, we can return to the, it's up here, the files. Let's just do like this. And instead of referring to the hard code, the columns that I want included in here, I can simply refer to another query that I have that contains the list, and we'll get the imported columns in. Now, you might notice that when I clicked this one in order to import it, a lot of the steps here was generated. It imported the CSV file with the hard-coded values up here. It did also promote my headers, and it also changed the type. This is because the standard setting in your Power BI, let's have a look at the options. If you go to data load, you will see up here that the type detection is turned on. So when we work with unstructured sources, as a CSV file is, it will do this for us. It will detect headers and column types. I actually prefer to turn this off so it doesn't create these steps, but I am in control of what the data should be, how it should be promoted, but at least also which data types does my columns actually is expected to return. That can be, of course, something you want to do. Otherwise, you like perhaps the help. And then this can be set for the current file, but it can also be set global. So the type detection here can, I want it always, or I want it based on each file setting, or I want it never. I don't want Power Query Editor to help in promoting headers and setting column types. Let's cancel this one. The next step is to have a look at Excel files. And
That's because I've filtered my list of files. So let's just do like this. Make sure that all the files are present in my query. Now, Excel files is when you look at a folder, and in this case, I'll just have a look at these 3 Excel files. What could possibly go wrong? When I click on this, you will see that first of all, the first step will, of course, show me the full path of the file. Or will it? No, it's referencing the filtered row and again referencing the content and again specifying the folder path and the name of the file. When we then say, oh, you need to use the Excel workbook connector, it will reference the previous step and we will get a list of tables and sheets in my data. Now we can look at the data and see that the file actually contains this information. We can also see that is a sheet item. Sorry, the item is called sheet 1, and the kind of data that we are looking at is data from a sheet. If you have a named table on in your Excel file, then you will have 2 lines, one called sheet and one referencing the named table range. When we click at table, what actually happens in the code? Now, first of all, notice that it referencing the name of the sheet, but also the kind. If you know that people might provide you with an Excel sheet that changes the name from one month to another, you can, and you know that it's the first worksheet that you need to import, then your code will, if you do like this, then it will fail. So you could actually do by putting in a 0, you are referencing the first element that is shown when we come from this step, the imported. Now the first element, even though it has row number 1, but the lists are 0 based, so the first row will be number 1, and the second row, sorry, will not be number 1, will be 0, and the second one will be 1. So by changing this argument, you are making sure that we are also always importing the first sheet from the files that we want to import. And then we can start to do our transformations. So I want the first row as header. Now it detects, because I didn't change the way our auto detect should work. So it creates the promoted headers and the change type for me, and we get text data. Now let's delete all this and just show you what happens if you use this function, the combine files. It's a great tool when the files are the same, but if they are not identical, then it can be hard, at least even for me, to find out where should I then fix the error. So I prefer to be in control of what happens. But let's have a look at what happens when we use the combine files. Now, what happens is that we will have to pick a sample file. Which file should sort of create should we create our code based on? So we'll just pick the first file and say, I want sheet 1 and click OK. Notice that we could skip files on error, but do you really want to do that? And then you are not in control of any of the files because, yeah, which file did actually load and which didn't. So I prefer not to click this. Let's click OK. And what happens is that the transformations that Power Query thinks should be created is actually created for us. It actually creates these helper queries containing of a sampler file and parameters, which refers to the files. I've created this before, so that's why it has a 2. And the transform file here actually creates a function that uses the Excel workbook as a parameter 2, loads the sheet 1 and kind of sheet, and promotes the headers and returns that. When we go to Excel file, you'll see that all the data has now been imported, or at least we think it has, because it up here filters it, and then it invokes the custom function here. It then does some renaming columns and removes the first elements. And when we go to this one, you can see that we actually in this one has an error. The key didn't match any rows in the table. It refers to sheet 1 and sheet, and what could possibly be the error and what should we do to fix it. Now, we don't get that much help here, but as I previously mentioned, it could be that the name of the file has changed. So let's have a look and see if we could actually change the file that is used as our sample file. This is actually this one. So the last file that contained an error was actually this one, number 3. So let's change that the sample file should be this one instead. And let's keep it here. So the sample file is this, and then we get the same error here in this result. Now this one uses the same data, but the problem is that when we need to change this one, we actually, where should I change my code? And it's actually done in this transform sample file. So if I go to the navigation here, and this is actually the problem because the source up here, as you can see, the item is no longer called sheet 1, it's called sales. So when we go to the next step, the item is not sheet 1 anymore. I can't really say that this should be sheet 1. So I need to do the trick and hope that it's the first one every time and click OK. And now it works. The sales sheet is imported. And you will see that when we return to Excel files here, that the invoke custom functions now work as intended, and all the error at the top here, the highlighting is now gone. Okay. Let's have a look at what happens when we do some of the other steps in our model. I have a local SQL database on my machine, and there we have a database called AdventureWorks DB 2019. So let's try and connect to that. So I'll pick the SQL Server connection, and we can use parameters here to point to the server name and database name, and I want to import this data. Now, if I pick a table, let's take this one, internet sales, and click OK. Well, we could click OK, but you can also actually right click here and click transform data. And what happens? Well, we have a source up here where we have, using the function SQL database, refer to the server name and database, and we will get a list of all the tables, views, and functions in our model. And then we navigate to the particular table. Now, same as before, Power Query writes the code that it refers to the schema and item fact internet sales. So again, using the same, we could reference this to other parameters or a value, so we could make it dynamic, but that's actually not what I want to point your attention to. If I select that it's only these columns that I want to import, and right click here and choose remove other columns. Now, what actually the applied step here says removed other columns. That's what we picked from the interface here, but is it actually what Power Query uses as a function? There is no function called remove other columns. There's a function called remove columns, and there's a function called select columns. So the applied step here doesn't actually say select columns, but it does say remove columns. So do not trust the Power Query editor naming of your applied steps. Then you can either rename this select columns in order to make it sure. But what happens if we actually misspell this? Now the column customer 2 key is no longer present, and your import will fail. Now remember that when we looked at the share elements, there is actually a third argument in our select columns called missing fields. I could add that reference in the advanced editor, but let's try and do it in the formula by instead. So when we click comma, you'll see that because we now are in the version where we reference the third available argument, we have the missing field. And we can then say, do I want to ignore this error? That means I don't get a customer 2 key, or do you want to use null? And if I use null, you'll see that I get the referenced column name in my table, but the value will be null for all values. So depending on what your import how it should work, you can take that into account. And if we use the other one, missing field ignore, the column is no longer imported. But if you use that in your data model or in your DAX formulas, then you'll get into trouble. Okay, this was some of the examples that I wanted to show you, and hopefully you have been inspired by some of the examples and say, oh, I need to control this hard copies value in your own Power Queries and make your queries more in your control and not necessarily only in the Power Query editor control. So that was it for me today. Again, any questions or comments?
Yeah. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for a great presentation. It was really insightful. So there's just one question in here, and someone is wondering, for the CSV, Excel import from a folder. Is it possible to automatically import new files once they are added to the folder?
Well, as you can see in this one, the reference is folder.files, then file location. So if I add the April file and refresh my data model, then the new file will be imported. So that depends on how you so if I selected all of the Excel files should be imported, then all of the Excel files in this folder will be imported. So when you add a new file, it will be imported. Now, if you want a procedure where I want Power BI to discover that I've put a file into that and do not want to use the schedule refresh, but if you want to act on the trigger that now there's a new file in a folder, then you need to turn to Power Automate in order to do that. There you can use a trigger that does something when a new file is created, either in, for instance, in Azure Blob Storage, where I typically use it, or in I believe there's also on SharePoint if you want to store your files there, that can discover that a new file has been added, and then you can call the Power BI action where you can refresh a data set. So when the file comes in, the trigger is activated, and then you can refresh the data model, and the data model import is constructed in a way that it includes the new file.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Eric. So another question just came in there, and this person is wondering, they're saying, I don't know if this has been asked as I was late, but would the recording be available?
No
So that is a question for myself. And yes, the recording will be available after the session, and you will be notified by email when it's available. So does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up this session?
Otherwise, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, reach me there, on X/Twitter.
Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any more questions, so we might just wrap up the session there. So just on behalf of the ESPC community, I just want to say another big thank you to yourself again, Eric, for taking the time today to carry out this webinar. We really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. That is it for today, folks. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care, and hopefully you'll join us again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.